Why was I sent there? I was sent there because my father thought that I had arrived at a point where I had slipped out of his control. I was 13, 14, 15-ish, and I was the last of his children. He was getting on in years, and to hang on to a kid who was running and living fast with friends and stuff, I was getting into trouble. And the kind of trouble that one would get into in the Bahamas, in Nassau, at that time, was the kind of trouble that was punishable by reform school. And reform school, almost, it didn't matter how old you were. Once you got in there, they didn't let you out until you were 18. So my dad sort of saw me 4 or 5 years being put away, and he thought that I should be not exposed to that. So he wrote to my older brother, my oldest brother, as a matter of fact. He lived in Florida. And he said to him that Sidney is at a place where it's very difficult to manage him, and I wondered if it would be possible for you to receive him in Miami and try to put him in school. Because I had quit school in Nassau to go to work, you see. I was working at the age of 12 and a half, and I was, my salary was essential to the family's survival. And when I was or was not working, I was running with a group of guys who were imaginative. And so my dad thought he'd try to salvage me, and so he wrote to my brother, and my brother sent him $10, with which he took me to the American embassy in Nassau and got for me an American passport, because I was born in Florida on a trip he and my mother had made some 14 years before to sell their tomato produce from their farming. He always knew that the accident of my birth in America was could be an advantage, and that's why he wrote to my brother and said that could you send for him? He is an American citizen, and as such he could get out of this environment that was about to grab hold of him. So my brother sent the $10, and my father got me a passport, and he took me down to the boat on the day that I left, and he put me on that, and he said, "Take care of yourself, son." Yeah. Anyway, I went to Miami. My brother was at the boat to pick me up.
And what was your first impression of this?
Oh, my first impression, I'd never seen things like that. I had never seen ships so big in the harbor. I'd never seen buildings so tall, never. And in Florida, comparably speaking, later on, I would see buildings infinitely taller than that, but I'd never seen buildings that tall. And the land area was vast. I mean, it took a long time to get from the waterfront to where he lived. And there were so many people and cars and stuff and things. It was really mind-boggling for a kid who had just seen a car when he went to Nassau a few years before. Everything was new. All kinds of remarkable things were new to me there. Also new to me was the way the society was structured. You know, you had segregation in Miami, very intense. You had racial lines and economic lines and class lines and stuff like that, and people who were party to it had all accepted it. That's the way it was. Whomever was involved in it, that's the way it was. It had been for them as had been for their parents and all the preceding generations that they could remember. For me, it was new, but really new. There was some of it in the Bahamas, but nowhere near as intense as it was in Florida.
So when you were delivering, you had a job of delivering, and you ended up on the wrong street.
I ended up not on the wrong street. I ended up on Miami Beach, actually, and I ended up on the correct street at the correct address. I was a delivery. I was a delivery boy.
Say it without me interrupting.
I was a delivery boy. I delivered medication, whatever was ordered from the drugstore. It was a drugstore called the Burdine's department store, drug department or something. Anyway, I was sent to Miami Beach to deliver this package to this particular house, and I went there, and I noted the address, and it was the same address as was on my instructions, so I walked up and I rang the bell, and a lady came to the door, a white lady came to the door, and she opened it, and she said, before I could speak, she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I came to deliver this package to you, ma'am." And she said, "Get around to the back door." I said, "But you're here, and here's the package." And she said, "Get around to the back door." Bam! And the door was slammed in my face. I couldn't understand that, really. I figured, I was a kid, mind you, and I'm new to this new value system. I figured she was standing there, here I am, respectfully, I passed her the package as I was supposed to do. That's my job, to bring her and she wants me to go. It was a pretty big house, so around the back was quite a ways. You know, all you have to do is accept the package. But that was tradition, and I didn't quite know that.
Were you aware of why she wanted you to go to the back door?
No, I didn't. You see, that's what I mean. It was, I didn't know why. But I learned later, that's the tradition. That's the value. That's the way things were done there. So, not knowing what the tradition was, and had I known, I probably wouldn't have abided by it. I thought that I'm here, and here is the package. She didn't choose to take it, so I sat it at the door, at the front door, and I left. Well, a couple of nights later, I go home to my brother's house. I was out somewhere, and as I approach the house, it's dark, no lights anywhere, you know. And I walk up to the front door, and as I went in, my sister-in-law grabbed me and pulled me in and threw me to the floor. I didn't know what was going on. And they were whispering, saying, wanted to know what I had done. And I said, I've not done anything. And she said that the Klan was here looking for you. And I said, oh? And she said, were you on Miami Beach? And, you know, one thing led to another. And I explained what the situation was. And apparently they had been visited. Well, it was such a shock to them that I was very quickly, my belongings were gathered, and I was, in the middle of the night, transferred to a relative in another part of Miami. And so I went, and that's where I stayed until I left Florida.
What was the situation also with that sheriff's group, where you were also in the wrong neighborhood?
That thing with the there came a time when I had elected, really elected as the only way for me to go, to get out of Miami, just to get out. And I had no money, but I started trying to take a freight train. I took many, and I got as far as Tampa, Florida, or Deerfield, or someplace up the line going towards Georgia. And I would wake up in the freight train, in some boxcar of a freight train that had arrived someplace, and they put it on a sidetrack, and there it sat. And I would wake up and I'm on this sidetrack. I don't know where I am. It is not in the city, so I would look for in the direction of where there would be lights coming, and I would find some light and I would walk to it and find myself in Tampa or some other place. I remembered once that I was picked up by the cops, and they took me to the local police station, and they called my brother. And he acknowledged that he had a brother and that stuff, and they were satisfied with that, and he had to come up and get me. So he came up on a bus and took me down all the way back to Florida, to Miami. He gave me a lecture about his being a father, and he has other children and a family and all that, and he has responsibilities, and he cannot really attend to my rearing as he would like to, and therefore I have to be more responsible, etc., etc., etc. But I still wanted to get out of town. I just had to get out of Miami. When I had accumulated enough money by whatever means, and it was quite legitimate, I worked somewhere, I picked up a few bucks, I had a few items of clothing in a place, in a dry cleaning plant. I went to the dry cleaners to pick it up, and they said that they had not returned. I then decided I want to get out so badly, I will go to the plant and get my clothing there, pay for it. And the dry cleaning guy said, it's okay if you go. And he gave me the numbers that I would give the people there, and they would find my clothing. I went to this place. It was dark. Night was falling, you know. I got there, they looked for the stuff, it was not ready. And they said it was not ready, so on, so on, so on, so on. So I have to go all the way back now and wait another day before I can get out of Florida. So I'm on my way back, but the buses stopped running. No buses are running. It's in a white neighborhood. And I am a long way from home. So I decided that I would hitchhike. I waited as long as I could for a bus, and then I found that they were not running. So I kept looking at cars going in the direction of what was then referred to as Colored Town. And every car that passed, I would see whether there were blacks in the car or not. If there were, I would thumb. If they were not, I would wait, and when I recognized an automobile with black occupants, I would thumb. Along comes a car. And it seemed to me to be black occupants. And I started to thumb. And the car came over and stopped. As soon as it stopped, I realized it was a car, it was actually a police car, unmarked, with 4 policemen, white, in the car. Anyway, they said to one guy sitting in the passenger seat front, said to me, he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just trying to get back to home. The buses stopped running. He said, you see that alley over there? You go up in that alley. Go up in there. So I went up into the alley, and they backed the car. Do I have to tell you about this? They backed the car up, and the guy in the passenger seat rolled the window, and his hand came up with a gun. And he just beckoned me with the gun like that, and I leaned towards the window, and he put the gun right there. And he started doing that with the muzzle of the gun. And they started asking me questions. They wanted to know where I was from, and who told me to come over here, and how the situation was that I was here after dark, and all stuff like that. Well,
Me in the comments, can you imagine things like this happening to you?
I wasn't as frightened as would have been to their taste. So the questions got meaner and more threatening and stuff. Anyway, behind the wheel was, I suppose, the person of authority, because he said, the guy with the gun said, "What should we do with this kid?" And he didn't use the word kid. And the guy behind the wheel said, "Let me ask you a question." And he said, "If we let you go, do you think you could walk all the way home without looking back?" I said, "Yes." He said, "All right." He said, "I want you to turn away and start walking home. We're going to be right behind you." He said, "If you look back, we're going to shoot you." So, I started walking. I got to the end of this alley that emptied onto this main street where I was hitchhiking, and I made a right turn. And along the street were stores that were closed, but they had glass windows. And by shifting my eyes to the right, I could see reflections of the police car creeping behind me. I was 50 blocks away from where I lived. And they stayed right behind me. I lived on 3rd Street. And then at 3rd Street, I turned the corner, heading toward the house. And the police car accelerated and went on about its business.
What did that do to you, that experience?
It made me pretty angry, but there is a combination. There is some fear, obviously. But you see, I was not accustomed to being that kind of afraid of white people. I was as much angry as I was afraid, because I thought that they were going to shoot me, but they needed to do something that would justify the behavior. That was in my mind. I thought it was an unfair situation, you know, because to treat someone like that was just peculiar. Now, it would take me years to get to understand how such a value could be cultivated in an adult person, you see. I was 15 years old. So what racism was in America then, what segregation had wrought then, what the state of things were then, it was a long time in the making. And these cops had no understanding of the dynamics of their behavior, really. They really didn't. I suppose they must have been trained to behave that way. And they have seen other people behave that way. And it had grown to be an accepted behavior under such circumstances, so that they could come to it with such ease. Amazed me. Amazed me. Luckily for me, on the other side of the coin, I was not raised in Florida. Had I been
On the comments from the story and his experience that he's talking about, what are your thoughts?
raised in Florida, the desired effect would have been instant. You know, I would have been sufficiently afraid, as would have been the expectation, and I would have probably behaved in a manner that I probably would have thought would be expected, you know. But I wasn't raised in Florida. I was raised somewhere else. And I had time where I was raised to get a fix on myself. So there you are.
So, from Florida, you went to New York. How did you get to New York?
I first went to Georgia to work in the mountains in a summer resort. And I worked there for the summer months. It's way up in the mountains of Georgia. I don't quite recall. Susan, disconnect the phone. You know,
Yeah. Go on, Sidney. Tell me. You went first to Georgia and made enough money there.
I made $39 that I saved in Georgia. I was a dishwasher in Georgia. I was working in the kitchen in this resort area there. And it was wonderful. I was working as a dishwasher all the way at the top of this mountain, and I would come down in the local town at the foot of the mountain where there was a black community, small, and I would get one day per week off, and I would go there, and it would be nice, and then I would go back up and work for another week. And after the summer was done, I had saved $39. I came down. The decision now is what to do, where to go. Certainly Florida was not a possibility. I went to the bus station, Greyhound bus station in Atlanta, and I walked up to a ticket window. And the lady said, where would you like to go? And I said, where is the next bus going? And she said, the next bus is leaving in 10 minutes and is going to Chattanooga, Tennessee. I said, how far is that? And she says, oh, that's a few hours or an hour and a half, whatever it was. I said, when is the next bus going? She said, the next bus is going. And I said, how far is that? And she said, that's 2 hours. I said, and the next bus? And by this time, she's becoming, and she said, where do you want to go? I said, I don't know. I said, and then she said, well, the next bus is going to Philadelphia, the next bus is going to New York. I said, how far is that? And she said, well, you'll ride all day today and all day tomorrow and whatever. I said, I want to go there. So I bought a ticket one way, and I left for New York. And I arrived in New York with $3 in my pocket, because much of my few $39 got one part of it went for the bus, but there were other dollars I had in a small little valise in my bag in the baggage compartment, and someone rifled through it and took much of the clothing and a few dollars, but I did have $3 in my pocket. So I arrived in New York with $3 in my pocket.
Happily.
Certainly.
And so what was the impression of New York?
Well, I had two impact from New York. The first was the people, just so many people, and buildings, tall buildings, and people were moving on the streets at such a rapid pace, and seemingly everyone was in a hurry. But more than that, there was the other impact was I felt at ease. I felt compatible. I felt okay. Mind you, that might be coming off of stories I might have heard about New York. New York is in the North. The North is different from the South. I heard stories like that. Harlem was in New York. And in Harlem, there was a substantive community. I had heard talk about that. So I suppose I got to New York with expectations that were contrary to what I had experienced in Florida. New York was wonderful. It's just an extraordinary place. Mind you, well, New York was an extraordinary place, but it overwhelmed me very quickly. I mean, it got the better of me. I had some very trying times in New York. Very. Times that I survived. I went to Harlem instantly. I wanted to know how to get there. I wanted to see the place. And I checked my little valise with the remaining items of clothing that I had. And I want to go to Harlem. So I saw, woo! I saw a black guy going down in a hole. It was some steps going down into the ground. And I said, excuse me. And he said, yes. I said, could you tell me how do I get to Harlem? He says, well, you go right down there and you take a train. I never knew there were trains underground, you know. Anyhow, I went down there and I learned how to put a nickel in the old thing, and I took the subway. I had been told where to get off. I got off at 116th Street. And I was smack in the middle of Harlem. And I walked around for hours, it seemed. And as it got dark, I started looking for a place. Now, I have no idea. I'd never been into a hotel. I never knew what the cost of a hotel was. But I had these $3, by now maybe $2.40 left. And I imagined that maybe I could get a room for $1. And I went to a place, having inquired on the streets. I went to a place, and the cheapest room they had was $3 for the night. So I got back on the subway. I went back down to 50th Street and Fifth Avenue and 8th Avenue. And I walked from 8th Avenue to Broadway and 50th Street. And I saw the most incredible sight I had ever seen to that point in my life. It was nighttime on Broadway, looking south from 50th Street and Broadway. The view was amazing. There were lights of every color you can imagine, and almost all of them formed images, faces. There was a guy with his mouth open, huge figure of a face, and out of it was coming smoke. And there was his hands near his face with a cigarette 60 feet long, it seemed, you know, and it was smoking and things like that, and images of creatures and people running around on enormous billboards and stuff like that. I had never seen things like that. I never knew light could be used in such a way. It was amazing, you know. So I walked toward it. I just walked down Broadway looking, bumping into people, of course, but looking at all of this massive display of lights and colors and images and stuff like that. And I wound up at 42nd Street. And then I turned just right a little bit, and 42nd Street was this massive array on the right and the left-hand sides of the street of theaters, movie theaters, all movies from Broadway to 8th Avenue, movies, and people. Just off of the corner on 42nd Street and Broadway was a little milkshake stand. And I saw a lot of people just standing there getting milkshakes. I walked up and I noticed that they had milkshakes and hot dogs. So I ordered a hot dog and I ordered a milkshake. And it was so delightful. I was so full of enthusiasm and energy and interest. And I mean, the excitement was just bubbling in me. And I ate my hot dog. And I'm going back up Broadway with my paper cup of my malted, see? I get to 49th Street and Broadway, and there is a sign in a window that says dishwasher wanted. I'd made note of it, but I wasn't yet ready to release myself from this thing. So I walked up and down Broadway from 50th Street to 42nd Street and back for about 2 hours. Mind you, during the walk back and forth, I'm spending my $2.40, so I wound up busted. About, I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I stepped inside this place at 50th Street, 49th Street, and Broadway. It was called the Turf Bar and Grill. I walked in there, and I said, "You have a sign in the window for a dishwasher." And he said, "Oh, yes." And I said, "I'd like to apply." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Come around behind the counter," which I did. He was the barman. And he picked up a trapdoor with stairs leading down into the basement. I went down into the basement. That's where their kitchen was. And they had this monster dishwashing machine. And they hired me on the spot. I didn't know how to operate the machine, but they taught me rather quickly. And I worked there all that night till the wee hours of the morning. And because I was relief for that, because I just came in, they paid me on the spot when I was finished. They gave me $4.11 for the night. They had given me 2 meals as well. And I thought, this will be my salvation. I can work as a dishwasher and receive 2 meals per day or per night. I said, that would be really terrific. And that's what I became. I became a dishwasher, and I became quite good at it. As a matter of fact, that's all I did. to sustain myself was to wash dishes.
And what about your sleeping on the billboard?
Well, you really went into a lot of stuff, didn't you? Your research was better than mine. I slept in a pay toilet at the bus station first. Several nights, as a matter of fact. And then I went to the rooftop of the Brill building. It was like having a penthouse apartment. The elevator operators and the people who worked there never knew that I was sleeping on the rooftop.
In the comments, what do you think about Sidney Poitier's experience?
I would go in, get on the elevator, and I would get off a floor beneath the roof, and I would wait till it was advantageous, and I would just go up the stairs and out on this rooftop. And at night, the view was spectacular, obviously. I used to spread the Journal American down on the floor of the roof and lay on it. That was my bed. And then the winter started gathering. And it was too cold to do that. In the meantime, you wonder how I managed, you know. I managed because I was a block and a half from the bus station where I could go into the John where I used to sleep and do my bird baths and, you know, wash up and be prepared to go to work and stuff like that. But the winter came and it was very difficult.
Was that your first winter in your life?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about it.
How to tell you about the winter? The winter, my first winter was an experience. I had never been, ever in my life, in temperature below maybe 64, 65. 99 and 9/10% of my lifetime were spent in temperatures 78 to 100 and more. But the winter in New York, that first winter, it was something.
You had no clothes.
I had no clothes. I had no gloves. I had no appropriate shoes or socks. I had no scarves. I had nothing. I had summer clothing that I wore in Florida, most of which had been stolen on the bus when I came to New York. My hands would freeze. My lips would freeze. It was cold. It was cold. I saved every penny for about 2 weeks, and I got a room in Harlem for $7 a week. And I was sleeping in the warmth for a while, but then I couldn't maintain the rent, and I was then back on the street for a while. The winter was a teacher. Yeah. It was a tough adjustment getting used to the seasons. It was a tough adjustment. But you do what you have to do, and I did. And in time, I became okay with it.
So when was it that you saw the ad for the theater?
Oh, lots took place before that, but I saw the ad for the American Negro Theater. I was washing dishes And I was in between jobs. And I used to go to the Amsterdam News, which was a black newspaper then, still is, by the way. I used to go to the Amsterdam News for jobs off of the want ad pages. And one day I'm looking at the want ad page in the Amsterdam News, which said dishwasher wanted, porters wanted, all of those elevator operators and janitors, all those things. And over here to the left was the theatrical page, but I'd never read those newspapers. I never read theatrical pages. When I wanted to go to a movie, I never consulted a newspaper, so I didn't know what a theatrical page was. And here I am staring at a theatrical page. And the one thing that caught my eye on that theatrical page was actors wanted. It was an article about the American Negro Theater wanting actors for its new production. It did not say, actors wanted, we are going to pay you a salary. It just simply said, actors wanted. I presuppose, as if it was a dishwasher, they would pay me a salary. So I decided I'd go take a look-see, and maybe I could do one of those jobs. I go to this place. The American Negro Theater then was located in the basement of the Schomburg Collection, the library of the Schomburg Collection on 35th Street and Lenox Avenue. I went there with my newspaper, and I went to this little door behind the library, and I knocked on the door, and Ovar said, come in. I walked in, and there was a guy, a huge man, very imposing looking man, and he said, what can I do for you? I said, I read this thing in the paper about actors wanted. He says, are you an actor? I said, yes. He said, okay, come here. And he took me in. And he said, well, where have you been acting? I said, in Florida. Woo! And he asked some questions, and I gave him very quick, off the top of my head answers. And he said, okay, take this script. And he handed me what essentially was a book, but it was soft. I had never seen a script in my life. I didn't know what a script meant. So he passed it to me, and I took it, not knowing what he would say next, and I waited, and he said, go up on the stage and turn to page, and he gave me a page number, and he said, you will read John, and I'll read the other part. We'll play the scene. I said, okay. So I go up on the stage with this script, and I opened it, and I found the page he mentioned, and I opened it. And before I could say anything, he said, take a minute and just... And before I could say anything, you rolling? And before I could say anything, he said, take a few minutes and read the scene through, and let me know when you're ready. So I said, okay. So I have this script in my hand, and I'm reading what I now know is a scene, and there are two people. I'm John, I suppose, and there's another name somewhere, and underneath that name are words, dialogue for this other person. And I figured, oh, I got this now. John is my stuff. That's what I have to read. And I read this thing. And finally he said, you ready? I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, let's start. Woo! And he said... And I took my script, and I said, so, where are you going to follow? That was the level of my reading. I mean, I had a year and a half in school in Nassau. So my reading was very poor, but I could sort of manage. I was taught in the school I went to that you broke everything down in syllables, you know? And so I would always take 3 words, and I would try to get the sound of the 3 words, and then I would put 3 letters, then I would put the next 3 letters and the next 3 letters. So my reading came out very halting and very disjointed and absolutely no resemblance to an actor. And he hit the ceiling, this man. And he came up on the stage and he snatched the script out of my hand and grabbed me by the arm, spun me, and with this grip on my arm, started moving me towards the door. And he
what this man was going through when he heard Sidney Poitier read.
He's talking as he's going. He says, "What are you doing wasting people's time?" On the way to the door, mind you. He said, "Why don't you get yourself a job?" No, here's what he said, verbatim. He says, "Why don't you go out and get yourself a job as a dishwasher or something and stop wasting people's time?" By then, we're at the door. He opens the door and he says, almost like icing on the cake, he said, "And besides, you can't even speak." He was referring to my Caribbean accent, you see. Bam! The door slams behind me. First thing that jumps into my mind, I say, how did he know that I was a dishwasher? What was there about me that made him say, why don't you go out and get yourself a job as a dishwasher? Was there something about me that suggested that? And if there was, what was it? It didn't just come out of his head like that. What was it? Why did he? And in my mind, I equated his attitude with meaning a dishwasher is your level. So why don't you go out and seek your level and find a life, right? I also said to myself, if I don't do that, if I find that I can do something other than that, then he will not have been prophetic. I made up my mind as I was walking to 7th Avenue and 135th Street to take a bus downtown to an area where there were a lot of employment offices where I would find a job as a dishwasher. By the time I got to 7th Avenue, I made up my mind, I am going to be an actor. For no other reason but to show him that dishwashing was not going to be my life. I went downtown, I got a job as a dishwasher, and my first monies, I bought a radio, a very small radio, not a transistor as we know in recent years, but it was a small regular radio, little tiny box radio. It cost me $13. I took it home to my room, and every waking hour for 6 months, I would listen to the radio because I knew I had to get rid of the Caribbean sing-song accent, because he had all but told me I couldn't even speak. So, after 6 months, I went back there because I had learned in the meantime that they used to give auditions there. But they had moved to another place, a larger place, had a wonderful theater. It was called the American Negro Theater at 127th Street. I went there, found out that they were going to have an audition for new actors to start a new class. And I said that I'd like to come in for that, and they said, fine. Now, I looked around for this guy, but he wasn't there. They told me the date. They said, you must come with a scene. I didn't know you could go to a place and buy a book of plays. So I bought a True Confessions magazine, and I memorized the first chapter of it. That was going to be my audition. I went to the audition, to make a long story short, and I saw the guy. He was, oh, my life and days. His name was Frederick O'Neill. Frederick O'Neill was one of the most remarkable people that I got to know. He was a fantastic actor. He eventually became the head of Actors Equity in New York. He was a trained theater person. And his outburst to me was almost a comment quite the contrary to everything I thought. His behavior to me was saying, I would learn later. I never asked him, but I deduced. His respect for his profession was such that my assuming that I could come in off the street and impersonate an actor offended him. Offended him. And he was one of the people I would have to perform for. And I performed my little, my paragraph from this True Confessions magazine, at the end of which, I'll make this quick, at the end of which they didn't select me, as a matter of fact. And I left. They informed me later that I was not selected because whatever the reasons. But I was devastated. But I did notice when I was there that night that they did not have a janitor. So 3 or 4 days I went back and I said to whomever was in the office, I said, you know, I auditioned the other day and I was told that I was not accepted. And I thought, because I noticed that you don't have a janitor here, I said, I work during the day, sometimes I work at night, but I can always come by and do the janitor work. I said, if it be of interest to you, I would do the janitor work for free if you let me come in and study. And they said, well, I can't do much about it, but I can pass it on to Miss whomever or whatever. So one person led me to another, and I repeated the same story, and it got to a man named Abram Hill, who was one of the directors there. And he was so impressed with the idea that I would be interested in studying, that he spoke to his compatriots. He said, let me know in a few days. So anyway, long story short, they took me on. And I would go early evenings before classes, and I would mop, and I would clean, and I would make things right on the stage and sweep up and stuff. And after classes, I would put out the garbage, such as it was. And after one semester, they let me go because they didn't think I was going to work out. And the drama teacher's name was Osceola Archer. Anyway, one thing led to another, and My fellow students came to my rescue. They asked the drama teacher to keep me at least till the end of the following semester so I could have a chance to do something with the production. She was somehow impressed with that. And they kept me.
Who were the students?
They were my fellow students in the class that had been collected out of those who had auditioned with me. And then, as we got close to the student production, everyone had a chance to try out. I tried out, but I was rejected again for the student production. And the part that I wanted, a guy comes in, interesting, a guy named Harry Belafonte. I had never met the man, never heard of the man, never knew anyone existed by that name, until I'm in the basement of the theater organizing some props and costumes and old stuff that had been used in other productions to see what could be used in the new production. He came down into the basement, and I looked at this guy, he looked at me, and we introduced ourselves. And he was very pleasant, very nice, very handsome man. And we had a conversation, and that was that. A few days later, I found that he had gotten the part that I wanted in the production, and which for me was cool, because I would get a chance to learn about things from a guy, because he was not a student. He was brought in by the drama teacher. And my friends in class, once Harry had been hired, my friends in class went to her again on my behalf and said, Miss Archer, you know, Sidney could be his understudy. And she said, all right, I'll give it some thought. And she again said, okay. And I became Harry Belafonte's understudy. And
so history begins.
And so it goes.
A long history.
Yeah. A long history.
So you went on for Harry?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Harry's dad worked as a superintendent at a building in Holland. And Harry was, as was the custom, I suppose, would help his dad to remove, in those days they burnt coal for heating, and the ashes used to be dumped in big cans and taken to the sidewalk for the garbage collectors to come. And Harry's job was to help his father on certain days when certain things had to be done at the building. And he was not able to make it on a given evening when Osceola Archer had invited the director who had previously directed the play we were doing, that Harry was starring in, which was called Days of Our Youth. And because it was a sudden understanding on the part of the director and Harry, they were caught shorthanded. She had previously invited this other director to come and see what she had done with the production. So it was too late to cancel it or make other arrangements. Therefore, she asked me to play the part that night. And I did. I don't know how well I did, but obviously it was good enough. The guy that she had asked to come up and see the play was himself about to direct a black version of a Greek comedy drama called Lysistrata. Watching the play, he saw something in what I did that interested him and asked me after the production, would I come on Monday to his office? He'd like to speak with me. He didn't say why, but I said, yes, I would. I did go that following Monday to his office, and he said that I'm going to be doing this play, and I wondered if you would read for me. It's part of Polydorus. And I said, yes, I would. He gave me a script. Now I know what a script is, and stuff, you know. So I read this Polydorus. It was a kind of a cute little part, small. I had about 10 or 12 lines. And I read for him, and he offered me the job. And they, in fact, did go ahead with the production. I was able to join Actors' Equity. I became an actor, so I went into rehearsals for this job that just came out of nowhere. And interesting thing happened on opening night. On opening night, naturally there is a nervousness abroad, behind stage and in front of in the theater itself. And I'm watching all of the people who are with me backstage, the stars and everything. They go up to a little peephole in the curtain and they look out at the audience. I didn't know it was a peephole looking out at the audience. I had no idea what they were doing, but they would go up and they would peek through this little thing. Well, when the coast was clear, I decided to go up and take a peek what's they're looking at. I looked through this little peephole, and there, through this eye, I saw 1,200 people sitting out there in this theater. And my heart started going like that. I mean, I got so scared.
Be honest in the comments. How would you feel knowing that you're about to step on stage and 1,200 people will be watching you?
At this point, it's almost time for curtain, right? And they said, places, and I got to my place. You know, I knew all the terms now through the rehearsal period. And wham, the curtain's up. And the first few actors, I'm like the third or fourth actor to enter. The first few actors, they start the play, and it's beginning to unfold, and my turn comes, and I can't help, I got to go out there, but I'm panicked. I gone out on the stage, and I am out there. And while I'm there, something in me couldn't prevent me from turning my head to the left and taking a look at the audience. I turned and I looked, and there again, these 1,200 people all looking at me. I turned back to the actors and I read my line. What I read was not my first line. What I read was my 7th line. The actor I gave the line to, he looked at me as if to say, oh my God. And he in turn, trying to get me back on track, he goes back to the answer he would have given to my first line. By now, I know what I've done, so I'm trying to adjust, and to that line, I gave him the answer to a 5th line or a 6th line. Now the audience, on my response, suddenly they start laughing. I'm assuming, naturally, they're laughing at me. So I get more frightened. And the more he tried to get me on track, the more I go askew. I'm grabbing for lines, none of which is correct, obviously. By now, the audience thinks it's so funny. And I am crestfallen. I still have 3 or 4 lines to go. I don't know whether I should run off the stage or not. But I stuck it out. Finally, I got to a point where I had no more lines to misrepresent. And the audience is falling down. They're just having the best time. I come off the stage. I go up to my dressing room that I shared with other actors. I got undressed out of the costume. It was a Greek tragedy comedy costume. I got dressed in my street clothes and I walked out of the theater. I walked to Broadway and then turned right going uptown. I walked all the way from 44th Street in Broadway. I walked up to 165th Street, bemoaning the tragedy that had befallen me. I wandered around in the 165th Street area for quite a while, and then about 12:30, 1 o'clock, I decided I might as well go back to my room and try to lay my head down and forget about this flirtation with theater, because obviously it was over. At 145th Street, near where I lived, there was a newsstand. And at that point, as I was turning the corner, in those days, the Daily News used to come by, all the big trucks, but the Daily News I remember because that's what I used to read, and dump a bunch of papers. And the guy who was the paper seller, he would clip open the wire and then put the stuff up there. And I said, what the hell? I took the Daily News, and I took a couple of other papers. I was too frightened to even open them, so I'm walking home. And then I figured I better not take them upstairs because the lady who's renting me the room might read it, and I don't want her to read anything terrible about me. So I decided I'm opening it up. And the Daily News, whatever their comment was, and then whatever the other newspaper comments were, shocking. They wanted to know, those papers that I read, who was this kid that came out on the stage at the very beginning of the play and absolutely entranced the audience. I didn't know they were talking about me. Couldn't have been talking about me. I didn't do any such thing. Apparently, the juxtaposition of the lines appeared to them quite humorously and a stroke of genius, whoever did it. I got the credit for that. I got the credit for it. Wherever I was mentioned in all of the reviews, and in those days there were 13 daily newspapers in New York City. 13. Now, I don't know that I got mentioned in all 13, but wherever I was mentioned, it was the most wonderful, delightful response to the little performance that they figured I had given. When in fact I was so scared I didn't know what to do. I thought I had screwed up the whole production. I had dared, as Frederick O'Neill might have suggested, I had dared to imitate an actor. I felt terrible about it, and then these things that these people said. There was something about it that was sobering to me. The people who said such nice things in their reviews were unaware of what state I was in internally. Therefore, I was not worthy of the comments. But could I become an actor who can engender that kind of response on a genuine basis, go after it, and acquire it methodically through skill and the exercise of such talents as I might have? That sort of cemented for me a commitment to self and to the craft, to learn it, to master it as best I could, and to be an actor who knew what he was doing all the time, to be aware of, if there is magic to be spun, be aware that you're spinning it, or at least be aware that you can reach for that kind of magic. So that was important. And on the basis of that, I continued in the theater.
Let me know in the comments what in you that burns, that ignites that passion just like it did him? What, I mean, is it construction? Is it drawing? What about something that ignites something in you?
So amazing. Did you, by that time, get to know Ossie and Ruby and Bill Reeves?
At that time, it was during that period, obviously, I got to know Ossie and Ruby. Ossie, Ruby were both with Anna Lucastor at that time. And it would be a bit of time before I got to know them as friends. They were either starring in New York or on the road with the play. There were several companies, Ossie and Ruby. Bill Greaves was an actor like I was, new to the game, very gifted, very talented. We became very good friends. I have an enormous respect for Bill Greaves. He's a man of towering strength. And what he's done with his life and his career and his knowledge of film is remarkable. He has just, as you may know, has just finished a documentary on the life of Ralph Bunche that I've seen. And it is spectacular. Yeah. It is spectacular.
And the other Bill?
Bill Branch?
Bill Branch.
Bill Branch was a breath of fresh air in the American theater that I knew. He wrote a play called A Medal for Willie. It was so wonderful, so refreshing, so imaginative. That's when I really was first introduced to Bill Branch. He was a close friend of Ruth and Jenny Peace, two sisters, actually, who were instrumental in much of my life. Bill Branch, therefore, as well, was instrumental in much of my life. And you know, I've come across the years with friends like that, Bill Branch, Ruth, and Jenny Peace, and I can count them as having been there more than 50 years. More than 50 years.
They were there
They were there
at the beginning.
at the beginning. And today, Bill and I, we muse about the years we carry on our shoulders, you know, and we think about the missteps of youth and the opportunities missed. And
Which of the Bills was dating Juanita before?
Bill Greaves was. Bill Greaves was. He was dating Juanita, and he introduced me to Juanita.
Bad step.
Bad step. Bad step. Because I married Juanita, and that wonderful lady, we had 4 great kids. So I thank Bill Greaves for that.
Getting married, starting a family. Working and starting a family, and you were a baby.
What?
How? I mean, what made you want to start a family, and how did you work and make all that?
Family. You have to be lonely and have survived it, not by when we are lonely, we can do something about it. One of the cosmetic things we do is we can place ourselves in situations that anesthetizes the loneliness, or allows you to manage with it. There comes a time when I believe once you are able to manage your loneliness with yourself, then you get a close look at what life with another person can and should be. Otherwise, you make a big mistake, I think, because some people then who make the move because fundamentally of loneliness, they find that they are still lonely in relationships sometimes. And that's because they didn't work through the propensity for loneliness inside, you know. See, being alone is different from loneliness. Loneliness is a killer, it really is. And you can work on it. Well, having been alone and having been lonely and having survived them both, when I got married, I was reaching for what I had as a kid with my family, with my father and my mother and my brothers and sisters. I was reaching for that energy that was so rewarding in my early years. So when I got married, first time, I wanted to build a family like that. And I started right out doing it. 4 kids. Worked great for a long time. And then the pressures were difficult. And my first wife was quite a wonderful person, quite a wonderful person. Terrific mom. Good wife.
And you're friends still.
And we're very good friends still. But we had different our comfort zones were at different stations in a way. Well, she was better able to embrace life at a certain point and say of her life, this point is sufficient for the fulfillment of my life. I respected that, but that was not the place where the fulfillment of my life could have been arranged. I had yet to go another place. So then when that happens, the person who finds a fulfillment at a given level tends to rest there. I still had anxieties driving me elsewhere. And in our situation, it was not her fault. It was to her good fortune that she found a sense of fulfillment at a given point. I was still in the search, you know. And
Part of your talent, that search.
it might have been. It was a necessary search for me, because the me that I am now was in the formative stages when she found her peace, you see.
So, at what point did the first film happen, and how did it happen?
First film was No Way Out at 20th Century Fox. It happened, I was in New York, and the rumor had it that a man named Joe Mankiewicz was about to make a film called No Way Out, and he needed some young actors, especially one actor who could play a young intern. And I went, like others, to see about it to the offices of 20th Century Fox on West 57th Street. There was a young man then named Frank, I can't recall his last name. He worked for 20th Century Fox, and I had known him. He was a nice man. And when I went in, I recognized him, he recognized me, and I think because of that, he put my name down among those to be given a reading. And I read and was selected as one of those who would be put on film to be sent to California for Mr. Mankiewicz to see. What they did was they didn't audition me, actually. They just put me in front of a camera, and I turned around, I turned to the right, turned to the left, I looked up, I looked down, and they sent just those images to California. Word came back that of all the images sent, of all the actors, there were 4 or 5 in New York that he wanted to see when he came in. He first stopped in Chicago, and he saw 4 or 5 actors there out of that list. Then he came on to New York. And I was called in, like the other 4 or 5 guys, and he was going to give us a screen test, each and every one of us. And 3 or 4 guys had done work on their screen test that day before I arrived. When I arrived, they had me waiting for a bit. Then I went in, and Mr. Mankiewicz said to me, he said, did you read the script? I said, I read much of it as I could. I didn't get the whole thing. He said, oh, he says, well, let me describe it to you. And he gave me a kind of a quick description of the kid. And he said, okay. He said, let's see what we can do. And I got up there, and one of his assistants was reading the other lines, which puts me in mind of the first time with Frederick O'Neill. Things were different now.
Sorry.
And I read the scene. And he said to me, how would you like to play this part? Or words to that effect. I said, sure, I would like it a lot. He says, I don't know if what's going to happen. He said, but what are you doing? Are you free? I mean, he asked me some very pointed questions around the issue. And I said, yes, I'm free. He says, so if I choose to have you come out? And I said, yeah. Well, long story short, he hired me. And I went to California, and that started the career. I worked with Ossie and Ruby in that picture. I worked with Dots Johnson and Muriel Smith and a lot of other black actors and actresses. It was my first job. That's how it started, the first job.
And that was the part of?
That was the part of the young intern who worked in a county hospital in California. He was on duty when Richard Widmark's brother comes in, having been shot up in a robbery attempt. And he was pretty badly injured, and I tried to save his life, and I couldn't, and Richard Widmark assumed that I had killed his brother for whatever reasons, and so that was the dramatic foundation on which the movie was based. And it was quite an impactful movie. It was different. It was revolutionary for its time because it dealt with race pretty head on.
Yeah.
And
Now, tell the story about the organization that was formed, the protest organization that was formed in Nassau in order to get that film shown in the theaters.
protest organization in Nassau that was formed to get the film screened. You got to understand what Nassau was. Nassau was then under British rule. Under British rule then was a complimentary way of describing colonialism, while colonialism was a very unfair system to those who were the native colonials, whose lives and whose property and whose existence had been usurped by the British Empire. That's what made it an empire. Britain then was, figuratively speaking, a small body of land in Europe. Its empire came because it had finagled control over India, over many of the Asian countries, Africa, much of the Caribbean, almost all of the Caribbean, and therefore, consequently, was her empire. And our empire was administered by its nationals who were sent out to these posts to conduct the business of the crown to the advantage and the pleasure of the crown. Oftentimes, the advantage and the pleasure of the crown was not necessarily the advantage or the pleasure of the colonial person. That was Nassau. With that being the case, when I started in films in America, my very first film, when it got to the Bahamas, there had not been a tradition of black people coming to the screens in the Bahamas involved on such a high level of realism as that picture portrayed, in a country where that kind of frank look at race was not allowed because it was too explosive for the colonial value system. So what they did was they banned the movie. They said it cannot be shown. There was a censorship board, and the censorship board elected to have this movie not to enter the country.
So it was to their advantage to ban.
Yes. And so they did. They banned it. Now, the fact that it was a film in which a local boy was very involved, there was some outrage at the audacity of the film board to ban it because I mean, very seldom was there a film with any black faces in it. And oftentimes they were oftentimes questionable films in terms of what was going on with black people. Anyway, there were those, many I knew, but then I was a youngster. I was 23 or 24 years old. But many I knew of who had positions of authority. And they collected together and just really challenged the government and the board and forced them to show the movie, which they did. And it was quite an experience then.
Well, that was the group that stayed together. That protest against the film board, to have you, the homeboy,
Yeah.
be seen, was the group that eventually, in a different form, was the one that became the
government.
The government.
Well, yes. Principally, among that group that eventually became the government was a man named Milo Butler. He was a powerful man. He was a powerful in that his values, his attitude to life, and his sense of fairness was just great, massive. And there were others like him, and you met some of them when you were in Nassau. They decided that the government had to go, that the British government had to go. The only way the British government could go would be to win from it independence. To win from it independence required a lot of brain power, a lot of ingenuity, a lot of imagination, a lot of courage, a lot of perseverance. And that group, which was the nucleus of the force that ultimately won the government, they couldn't have been better handpicked, for the job. They really coalesced and they hung in and they worked together and they moved and they challenged and they nurtured the strength of the population, 90% of whom were black anyway.
But it started
with
No Way Out.
It started with No Way Out. And the members of that body, and ultimately the members of the government that followed, were, almost all of them were, with the exception of Milo Butler and the father figures of the movement for independence, most of them were fairly young guys. Few of them were older than me. Some were, obviously, but few. The Prime Minister who led the charge, Lyndon Pinling, was younger than I was. And he and I grew up a couple of blocks away from each other when we were kids, 14, 15 years old.
And so your mom and your dad saw you for the first time in a film?
Yeah.
Were you there to see that?
No, I was not there. I heard about it. My mom and my dad were invited by the theater owner to what would have to be called the Bohemian premiere. And my dad and my mom had never seen a movie. Never. So it was quite an interesting evening. My mom, there was a scene where Richard Widmark, toward the end of the movie, very tense moment where he's going to kill me, but before he does, he has a pistol and he started beating me with this pistol all across my head in various places. And my mother leaped up in the theater, I mean, she was so carried away by this whole experience. She leaped up in the theater and she said, "Hit him back, Sidney, hit him back, hit him back, hit him back." Well, as I'm told, the audience just didn't know what to say about this lady who stood up in the middle of a darkened theater shouting, "Hit him back, Sidney, hit him back." But I can understand, certainly knowing my mother.
And is that when you went back, or did you go back before that? The sun is coming in awfully up. Yoshi, if anything can be done, it's really hitting me.
No, he's behind you, Lee.
Can you see? Okay.
Shh. Okay, let's spin.
Cry of the Beloved Country. Indentured servitude to Zoltan Korda in order to work in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the conditions under which you were put in order to work there.
Conditions. I don't know that I was forced under any conditions. The conditions were required by the state.
The state of what?
South Africa, for the apartheid state of South Africa. But their requiring those conditions were not, I mean, the problem was not that they required those conditions. The problem was mine to decide to work under those conditions. And I wanted to see South Africa. I wanted to experience South Africa. I also wanted to play that part. Those were the compelling reasons for me. The conditions were, to some extent, not that much different from what I knew in the U.S. and in the Bahamas. It was infinitely more intense, and there was a degree of brutality to it that was mind-boggling. But it was not unfamiliar to me, so that my choice to do that part, which was a great part, and to see that country was no more difficult for me than it was for me to turn down or accept certain parts that I did accept in the United States. To turn down certain parts I did turn down in the United States. So it wasn't an enormous question of morality, integrity, dignity. They were questions, but if I were hard-pressed to make a decision based on experience, I've had similarities in my life in other places than South Africa.
What was the actual, when they say you had to be indentured?
Indentured at that time, my understanding...
Signing a paper?
No. I didn't sign any such paper that I recall. I might very well have, given the contracts on a film. I might have done so without any knowledge. But that, too, is not the fact, because had they made it clear to me that you are signing this, and what you are signing essentially is that Zoltan Korda will be responsible for your behavior. You are supposed to abide by the rules and regulations of the country. That's what it is. That's all it was. But it had an ominous meaning. You know, it meant that I would not go there and challenge the South African government on the basis of its apartheid practices. I wasn't going there to do that in any event. I was going there to work on a film. And once I got there, I was smart enough to know that it would have been absolutely ridiculous for me to try to challenge them on that. I think that what I came away from it with was an understanding of its bestiality, a first-hand look at how it operated. It was, in fact, an evil system. And to have spent 13 weeks there, I think 11 to 13 weeks in Johannesburg shooting the movie, I got to know South Africa as South Africa was, certainly from the standpoint of someone of color. And the experience was educational.
And candidly was also required to do...
Candidly was required to do the same. Candidly, unlike myself, once we were there, Canada ignored the rules and regulations. But that was Canada's nature. And the things he did to ignore them, I need not go into, but they were quite unusual. I went mostly into the townships. I got to know the people who lived in the townships and how they lived in the townships, and what their hopes and aspirations were, how tough life was for them, how they squeezed their joys out of such hard circumstances. And their leaders were who they were. I didn't get to know their leaders. I met Mandela, I believe, very early in my stay in South Africa, but it was the briefest of times. It was at an ANC function in the forest someplace. But I ran into people who I would learn later were very important people in the movement, and they were guys who were, you know, I worry about questions that are actually trivial, comparable to what they lived with day in and day out. You know, their lives were on the line all the time, and they could have been killed by a system that had to answer nowhere. Nowhere was there any force that required them to answer, you know. And I was in the midst of that. I was in that country at a time when they had already decided to exercise whatever means necessary for the survival of the state. Canada and I and two other black actors went down there to work. Canada was a remarkable fellow.
Tell me about
Canada Lee was a fine actor. Refined is the word I was reaching for. He was a free spirit in an unfree world, in a way. He, in South Africa, he exercised his sense of freedom in ways that I admired. He was very, very, very close to life in the townships, but he was also, and insisted on, life outside the townships. He was not permitted to travel, but he was courageous enough to travel hundreds of miles from Johannesburg to Cape Town, which was illegal for him to do, according.
Let me know in the comments, who do you speak highly of? The exact same way Sidney Poitier speaks highly of.
To the contractual obligations. And he ignored the dangers of the state. He just did. And because he felt he had another agenda, and that was, you know, at that time in his life, he didn't live very long after that. it seemed as if Canada was saying, these years, my sense of freedom, I'll be in South Africa as I am in the world. And he was. He was.
What happened to him?
Well, you mean when he came home? When he came home, there were no jobs, which was not anything new. There were periods when things were so fallow, you know, that he was left struggling for survival. The career, too, its best days had passed, and all he was left with was his sense of himself, which was plenty, because it saw him through to the end, you know. I admired him a great deal. He was his own man, Canada. And though life was not kind to him in the latter years, he really stood tall all the way. He was... and he never, you see, one of the things I find very interesting, in my life I have tried never to allow myself to be pigeonholed. And Canada exemplified that for me. There are guys like Canada who, by example, taught me that it's better to be your own man and pay as much of the price as you can afford than to be pigeonholed, to be slotted, you know.
As a person and as an actor.
Yes, a person and an actor.
Now, let me ask you something.
Economic viability means if it's good for economics, that's the rule. As a result, I look at people who get up on a television screen on a show like the Jerry Springer or a show like the Jenny Jones, or a show like that elderly lady, whatever her name is, Sarah somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sally Sarah somebody. Right. And there are others, many. Maury Probich is one, and there are lots of people. And they get Americans who might be half-witted or might not to degrade themselves in the name of what? You're not recording me, are you? Huh?
Yes.
Oh, no, I wasn't. I thought you were waiting for this stuff to go.
No.
No. You can't use that stuff, Lee.
I can't use it?
No, absolutely not.
We recorded on the small part.
Huh?
Did
We
you
recorded on the small part.
Yeah,
just
but
this last little
Doesn't
bit
make
of
any
it.
sense.
But
It's within the beginning.
it's a very
No,
it
you-
is the core of what's happening.
yeah, but you can't use it.
Core of what's I mean, I made a documentary called Down and Out in America, which was the beginning of the, well, you know, you should cut this because it's, you know, because I'm talking. That was the beginning of an agenda.
Of course.
And all these stations are owned.
That's right. That's right. That's right. They're owned. They're owned. I don't want to even get into it. Let's get back to our thing. But you're
We
gonna.
have to talk about it sometime because it's okay. The blackboard jump.
Yeah.
What were you doing to support yourself and your family between films?
I was working as a dishwasher between films in a little restaurant in Harlem called Ribs in the Rough, a little one that I was part owner of. And I was serving food as a waiter. I was preparing the ribs as a cook, and I was running the cash register, and I was the guy mopping the floors when we closed in the wee hours of the morning. That's how I fed my family at that time.
Did you make good ribs?
The ribs I thought were exquisite. I learned from many people later that they were absolutely awful, but that they were friends and they supported the establishment for years. I liked the ribs. We had a sauce that I thought was quite good, and they said it was probably something that would cure horses who had distemper or something. It wasn't widely received, but I had a partner who was a very good cook and a wonderful business person. His name was Johnny Newton. He's passed away now. He was good at it. He was a restaurateur. Is that the proper phrase? Restaurateur. He was good. He was good. I miss him.
And then Blackboard Jungle
Mm-hmm.
came.
Yeah.
This was a big picture.
Yeah. It was a big picture.
How old were you?
Blackboard Jungle? 27.
And you were playing.
A 17, 18-year-old.
Tell me about that.
Tell you about what?
Tell me about it so that my question isn't in between.
Okay.
Tell me.
About Blackboard Jungle. What's there to tell about Blackboard Jungle? Lots of interesting things to tell about Blackboard Jungle. The most interesting of which was the director, a guy named Richard Brooks. He was a fine filmmaker. Odd personality. Different kind of a person. He was an oddball, really. Very gifted as a writer and as a director. I made a few movies for him, and we were fairly close. He liked me a lot. He supported me very strongly and defended my right to be a friend of Canada's and Paul Robeson. Defended it. And at the studio, when they asked questions about my relationship with Robeson and with Canada Lee, he was. There were other things about Blackboard Jungle. I was amazed at the response from people in high places. I remember there was a lady who was the ambassador to Italy. Mrs. Claire Booth Luce, is that the name? And they thought that the Blackboard Jungle, her position was that the Blackboard Jungle was bad propaganda for the United States abroad because it showed a school system that was less than it ought to appear abroad. The picture was not shown in some areas of the South because of its racial mixture, and I suppose because of the realistic manner in which the film problems were dealt with. It was an important film for me in that it afforded me a kind of. It was good. I liked the part, and I managed it fair, and it was good. It was good for me. Helped my career a lot.
Blackboard Jungle was a big hit.
Big hit, yeah. Big hit.
And that was your first big hit.
It was my first big hit, yes. Yeah. but it, you know, it was not my first big hit in that I was responsible for it. It was a Glenn Ford movie, and, but it was my first appearance in a hit movie, and it's great.
And so, did interest start to pick up?
Interest started to pick up, yeah, interest started to pick up, but interest flagged and picked up and flagged, you know, that's the nature of the business. There were times when I got 1 or 2 calls, and then there were times for months and months and months I didn't. That's when I worked as a dishwasher in between the job opportunities and job offers. Also, I had gotten married and I had young children coming along, so I had to stay busy with some kind of income. I stayed in the restaurant business, working in that little restaurant I mentioned to you, until I got a call from Richard Brooks to go to, to go to Africa to make a picture with him called Robert Rock's picture, Something of Value. Something of Value. And that's when I was able to get out of the dishwashing and the restaurant business. I went to Kenya to make that film for Richard. It was a very interesting time because the Mau Mau uprising was in place. It was called the Mau Mau Uprising, but in fact it was an independence movement developing in Kenya. It took many, many, many years and a lot of lives for the Kenyans to finally win their independence from Britain. And I was there long before Independence Day. I was there during the height of the struggle, as I was in South Africa when that system was in full force. In Kenya, I worked on Mount Kenya, where the Mau Mau, some people call them freedom fighters, some people call it, depending on your point of view, I suppose, but where they were, they massed their forces and they dispersed them from that general area. And we shot there at Mount Kenya for some weeks, and we actually saw some of the Mau Mau warriors. Fascinating. And I worked in Africa many times. It was a great experience each time. I mean, it's such a vast continent. It's been a troubled continent, largely because of colonialism, but not exclusively because of colonialism. I mean,
no, it's very complex.
Very complex. The whole difficulties, the whole range of difficulties that Africa endures now, some of it has to be sorted out in terms of where all of the responsibilities can be properly placed, and it's certainly not at any one doorstep exclusively. But it's a continent with such vitality, such energy, and the difficulties, however insurmountable they may appear now, I think they are strengthening ultimately in terms of the future.
Well, a lot of those countries have known nothing but dictators and corruption.
Oh yes, dictatorships, corruption. You know, you look at Africa as Africa is articulated in the evening news or in media generally, and you tend to assume that it has problems that lie outside of those that could ordinarily or would ordinarily be made by the human personality, almost as if it was some will of some unknown force that found it necessary for such suffering to be endured and visited upon that continent. But that is only because there is no time taken to. The human personality sketches, designs the human condition. There is not a place on earth where conditions have not been the result of the human personality. Each culture has its mark. Each culture has its peculiar fingerprint. But none of these cultures and none of their marks or their fingerprints are without the same kind of representation. There is bestiality. It's experienced everywhere, and that is a part of the human personality. There is a kind of vulgarity to the human personality. However sophisticated, it matures as a result of education and refined society and all that. Out of it comes ultimately all of them: wars and murder and destruction. They don't come ever out of nowhere. Nowhere. They never come out of. They come out of the human personality. That's how they manifest. What triggers it are the ingredients of which the human personality is composed: greed, envy, lust, need for power, the need to exercise it, to need to control it, all of those things. There isn't a society or a culture in which you will find these things absent. How we deal with our problems, like we are a very sophisticated community, are we not? Yet we are constantly trying to prevent wars, and sometimes our efforts to prevent wars create wars. So when you, at least for me, when I take into consideration that long before the present state of things in Africa, we had a state of things in Europe, a state of things in South America, we had a state of things in Asia. Mind you, all the various cultures that compose these regions, within them, you found all of the negatives, every one of them, that plagues the world today, that plagued the world 1,000 years ago, that plagued the world 1,000,000 years ago. Whenever and wherever there was mankind, there were these possibilities. And they have not diminished at all because they are classic and inherent in the human personality. Less than what? Less than 60 years ago, we were cleaning up World War II.
Yeah.
And if you examine that, I mean, in some views, it was despicable what human beings were doing to each other. Today, this very day, we're doing the same things to each other in different parts of the globe. So, Africa, as a continent, is experiencing nothing different than the continents in Asia, South America, our continent here, Europe. No different. Times may be different. Cultural influence may differ. But the basics are always there in all times: greed, lust, fear, envy, need for power, execution of power.
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 Absolute power.
Yeah. And you know what it does, absolutely. Yeah. So,
So when you were there for the second time, when you were there, and was it something of value?
in Kenya?
Yeah. There was a situation where they weren't going to give you a room because you were a black man. And then, do you remember that situation?
Yeah.
Tell me that.
Well, I was making a picture called Something of Value for Richard Brooks, same guy I had made Blackboard Jungle for. And I arrived, all of the actors from abroad had been assigned rooms at the Stanley Hotel, I think it was. And Richard arrived before I did, so I didn't know anything about this. And he made inquiry at the desk while he was checking in. I was 3 or 4 days behind them coming from the States. And he asked about my accommodations, and he was told that there were no accommodations for me. So he said, why is there no accommodations for him? And they explained what their practices were. Which was that in Africa, in an African nation, people of African descent were not permitted in the Stanley Hotel. At least that's the way it went in those days. And Richard said, well, if that's the case, I don't know how many people we are all told. I suspect 100 or more, then we'll all have to find other accommodations, would we not? Which obviously changed the whole pattern right there. There was no more of a discussion about that. I was more concerned. I wasn't that concerned about it, because when I arrived, everything was fine. I went to my room and everything was okay, and the dining room was available to me, etc. My big concern was I knew I was going to work on Mount Kenya. And legend has it that on Mount Kenya there is a snake called the black mamba, which is a very, very deadly creature. And I am not too fond of snakes, you see. And I was told that on occasion such snakes could be found even in Nairobi itself, and that they had a habit of, if they were near a house, they would take refuge inside buildings. Well, a hotel is a building, I supposed, and I had to go to sleep in this room. Well, let me tell you, I didn't sleep a wink. I just kept seeing black mamba snakes fiddling around the posts of my bed, so things didn't work out very well as far as sleeping was concerned. And I stayed there for many weeks. I never got over that fear. I'm still not over it today. And I hope there are none in this apartment.
Well, the story that I heard on it, I don't know whether it's apocryphal or not, is that they found out how much money you were making.
Who?
In the movie. The people who own the hotel.
Oh, yes?
And they decided that you weren't black.
Oh, no, that's not so. You see,
I love it, though.
it's a lovely idea, but I'll tell you, it's not the way colonialism works. Trust me.
I like it.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to Phoenix City Story. That was, did we talk about Marty Baum? About how he became your agent?
I don't, maybe we did in Nassau, on Cat Island that day. I don't know if we...
No, we didn't.
We didn't?
No.
All right.
Are you putting out a flag up, Yoshi?
Yeah, well, it's weird.
Tell me about meeting Marty now.
Meeting Marty Baum. Marty Baum, my agent. many, many years ago, I got a call from an office in New York, an agency called the Baum Newborn Agency. It was Martin Baum, and he said, "You don't know me, my name is Martin Baum, and I wondered if you would come down and see me. There's something I want you to go and see about, a part." I said, okay, and I went downtown, 5th Avenue, 57th, between 57th and 58th Streets, and I went up to his office, and he explained to me what the part was. The picture was called The Phoenix City Story, and the part was a young black man who was a family person who had a job. And he said, "I'd like you to go next door to a hotel called the Plaza, something Plaza, not the Plaza Hotel, but it was across the street on 58th Street, where now sits the General Motors building." Anyway, I went to this hotel. I went to the suite I was directed to go to, and there was a guy, two guys, and they greeted me, and we talked for a moment, and he gave me a script. And he turned to a particular scene. He said, "I'd like you to spend a few minutes looking it over, and then, if you don't mind, would you read it with us?" I said, "Certainly." And I looked it over, and it seemed okay, the scene. And I said, "Fine." And I read it with someone, and they thanked me for coming, and I thanked them for receiving me, and I left. I went back to Marty Baum. They gave me a script and said, "You could read the whole script and let us know what you think about it." And I went back to Marty Baum, and I said, "They gave me a script, and I'm going to take it home, and I'm going to read it." He said, "Fine, you let him know what it is." I said, "Okay." I went home, and I read the script, and it was a fine piece of work. Not brilliant, fine piece of work. Nothing offensive in it, which was what I looked for first. And, but I decided not to do it. I decided not to do it because the reason I went into the business, the reason I became an actor, was not evident in the script, you see. I found no evidence of it. And so I went back to Marty, and I said, I read the script. He says, "Don't tell me." He says, I want you to know they want you to play. They want you to play it, and so they're offering. At that time, the offer was 1 week's work for $750, which was, for me, a lot of money at that time. And so I finally had to tell him, I can't play it. And he wanted to know why. And I said, "It's very difficult to explain." He said, "Try." And I said, "Okay." I said that anything I do has to have some positive reflection on my father's name. He didn't quite understand it at first. It took him a long time to. I couldn't explain it any better.
What was the part?
Let me know in the comments. Out of all the movies that Sidney Poitier has ever done, can you think of any movie that will leave a negative reflection on his father's name?
The part was the part of a young man who worked as a janitor. Phoenix City was a town where gambling was very big. He worked for people who ran a gambling house. And to teach the bad guys, to teach the gamblers a lesson, they killed the daughter of this janitor for reasons that I don't altogether recall. And when his daughter was killed, the way he responded, his behavior, what he said, and mostly what he didn't say. It wasn't what I needed. So I thank them for it, and I just didn't do it. So
What
that,
was your situation at home at that point?
financially,
Yeah.
dire. I mean, of course I needed the money a lot. Because I had children of my own at that time. I had 2 daughters at that time. Anyway, I thanked them, and I went back to my dishwashing job in Harlem. So, and that's all I did. No other jobs came along. In about 6 months' time, I got a call at my place of work from Martin Baum. And he said to me, "What are you doing?" He said, "You remember me?" I said, "Yeah, I remember you." And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm working in this restaurant. That's all I'm doing." He says, "You haven't had any activity?" I said, "No, nothing." He said, "Would you like to come down and see me for a minute?" He says, "I don't have anything to offer you. Just come down." I said, "Sure." I got on the subway and I went down to his office. I went upstairs and went into his office. And he looked at me for the longest time. And he said to me, he said, "I don't have anything for you." He said, "But anyone as crazy," his exact words, "anyone as crazy as you," he said, "I think I want to handle him. I want to be his agent." I said, "Okay, if that's the way you feel." And he became my agent. And he is still my agent. And it's now 50 years, I suppose, 40 years. Long time.
It's a lifetime.
Yeah.
Lifetime together.
Yeah. And he was a quintessential agent. He was different than my understanding of agents are. My understanding of agents, Marty Baum would go out to the studios, their New York offices, every day, and he would have his roster with him. And he would say to them, "I have an actor that could play," and he would say, "I read your script." And he would talk about this young actor that he had. And they would say, "Okay, we'll send him in. We'll take a look at him." He would never say to them, "This is a black actor." Never. I would walk in, and they would say, "Marty Baum sent you? You the guy Marty Baum was talking about?" I'd say, "Yes, I'm the guy." I suppose that the habit of doing such a thing by an agent in New York in 1951-50 must have impressed some of the people I went to see, because we got good responses, you know. Often they would read me, even though they wouldn't hire me, they would read me. And the opportunity to read for them was an opportunity I wouldn't have had otherwise. Had he said, "I'm sending you a black actor," and I said, "Well, there's nothing in it for black actors," is what he would have been told.
Yeah.
And he actually went out and sold me. I was totally unknown. He sold me. He propagandized me. He really went to town. And for years, he did it. For years. Now, if you look at the body of my work over time, you will see how extraordinary it was. The combination of Sidney Poitier and Marty Baum in that period. It would be immodest of me to even Well, let me put it this way. There were firsts registered in those first 20, 25 years. There were a lot of firsts registered. And he was largely responsible for them. So he's a friend and a compatriot and partner and stuff like that.
How did you get Edge of the City?
How did I get Edge of the City?
Yeah.
Edge of the City was originally a television play done on Philco Playhouse at NBC. I got that because it was written by a man named Robert Allen Arthur. Robert Allen Arthur was a wonderful writer, very liberal fellow. I think he was Jewish. Quite a compassionate fellow, I think. And he wrote this piece, and he had seen me at work in Blackboard Jungle, and he remembered it. And when it came time to cast, my name came up, and I was asked to come in, and I saw him, and I saw David Susskind. And I forgot who the producer was. I think it might have been at NBC at that time. It'll come to me. Anyway, they said, okay, fine. Then, of course, I got in trouble with NBC because they thought that I had, because I knew Paul Robeson and candidly, they didn't like the company I kept. And we had a kind of a go-around on that question. And they tried to step on my sense of myself. So I told them I passed.
You gave up the part?
Yeah, I certainly did.
Say that, Sid.
I gave up the part. I gave up the part. Small price. Anyway, David Susskind, to his everlasting, he didn't let go. He said, no, I want him to play this part. I want him to play this part. And, so he fought them. And I had no expectation that he would win, but I knew for certain that I wasn't going to play on their terms. So. But he and Robert Allen Arthur, Fred Coe was the producer's name.
Sure, Fred.
Fred Coe. And Fred Coe was there, and they apparently were trying to work it out. Then I got a call from a guy in the legal department at NBC. Asked me to come and visit with him. I said, okay, I wanted to visit with him. He was a lawyer guy who said to me, he said, you know, this is a problem we have because you're friendly.
At this point in the video, let me know, what's your favorite Sidney Poitier movie? For me, it's the movie he did, I believe, in 1977 called A Piece of the Action.